So as I was further explaining in my last video, I was interrupted, my wife got home. So inside this housing there is that plate down the bottom, that washer with springs underneath it, and then a piston seal. Now to get that out, there's a lot of spring pressure required to push it down to get the snap ring out, and you're gonna have to build some sort of a tool or some way to suck it down if you got clamps or spacers and something like that. But the way I ended up doing it is I built myself rather a crude block out of a 2x4, some 3-inch deck screws, so that it would slip over top of the shaft, and then I could push it down. And longer screws would be better, but at least I could get the pressure in there to pop the snap ring out and turn it slowly. And it wasn't not one of the more high-tech tools you can get, but it did work. So you're gonna have to build something. That's the only one that really is rather difficult to do. As far as the transmission speed sensor wheel, same kind of deal. It's spring loaded to get that in there, and you got to use some force. And I ended up actually putting some cardboard on both sides and squeezing it in the vise, and that's how I ended up breaking off that positioning tab. Fingers crossed, still hoping that's going to work. But we just squeezed it in there, and then you could squeeze it on top with a big clamp, pop it off, no problem. Very easy. But I doubt you'll have to change that, unless you are changing the housing. Then you'll have to do it. So that's another little fun tip. I'm making these videos because there's not really videos to be found on this topic. I've been having to figure this out as I go, so this may not be the best information you can find, but it definitely is something supplemental. So I'm hoping my TCM or solenoid board or whatever you want to call it is going to be good. Gave me a code. I've heard they can short out and fry the solenoids, but doesn't seem to be any metal in there. Nothing real fancy with removing the transmission. It's just a series of bolts. I took off the thermostat, which lives right here, the thermostat housing. 3 bolts, 10 millimeter. Pull them off, and then it's just a series of bolts, 15 millimeter heads and 18 millimeters, mostly 15s, all the way around here. And then where the transmission mates to the transfer case, right here, these three. There's 3 18 millimeters here, and then I believe actually one more right there, and that one's 18 mil as well. And there's a few along the bottom. This one is really hidden. You're not going to see it. You'll have to feel for it. And then there's a couple more 15 mils all the way up along the side. But other than that, nothing difficult in removing the transmission. Just a few simple bolts, and it comes off. And as for splitting it in half, same kind of story. It's very, very simple to split in half. A bunch of 13 millimeter bolts, and then it just pops apart. Nothing special about that either. Do support your engine when you remove the transmission, because right now the only thing this engine is hanging onto the K-frame by is by that motor mount right there, and that one right there. Everything is leaning that way, so you have to support the engine so that it sits at least level, if not a little bit higher on this side, because the transmission does kind of sit down in this frame, so you'll need to kind of angle it up so that you can pull the transmission out. But and you also do have to remove the CV axle. That is a bit tricky. I ended up being able to do it. I had just replaced the lower ball joint, so it was all bolts. I undid those and the ball joint, and I was able to just take the whole housing off, the whole unit, the whole wheel bearing housing, brake caliper housing, whatever you want to call it, the CV axle, the whole unit. You'll have to do something of that sort to do that, to get that CV axle off the output, or off the drive shaft. Or sorry, it doesn't come off the drive shaft. It comes off of the here, inside here. But you will have to do something to remove that. Then just a few bolts and the transmission comes off. That's about the only hard part. And that's about all I can think of.